The rain had been falling since morning, not hard enough to inconvenience anyone with an umbrella, but steady, thin, and persuasive. It turned the streets into dull mirrors and gave the faces of passers-by an unplanned sheen. From the window of the Brasserie Dauphine, the lamps along the quay looked like buttons sewn crookedly on a wet coat. Every few minutes a bus would groan to a stop, and the sound entered the room as if it were an old acquaintance who knew not to stay long. Maigret sat near the radiator that ticked in small, decisive clicks, his heavy overcoat open and his hat turned brim down on the seat beside him. He had not planned anything particular for the evening. It was simply one of those in-between hours when work was only half finished, and dinner with his wife was still far enough away to be a promise rather than a certainty. He warmed his hands around a glass of beer he did not intend to finish. Madame Maigret telephoned, the waiter told him, lowering a plate on the table with the slightly theatrical care reserved for regulars. She said to remind you it's rabbit in mustard sauce, slowly. She made a point of the slowly. I know her, Maigret said without smiling. She is afraid I will forget such details. The waiter, a little man with hair parted exactly in the middle, studied the window as if to check whether the rain had changed its mind in the last minute. She also asked if you would be home before 8. Maigret looked at the clock over the bar. The thin hands pointed to 6:15. In a little while the office would call, as they often did when a matter refused to tuck itself into file folders. Or just as likely nothing would happen, and he would leave his half-drunk beer and climb the short hill toward Boulevard Saint-Michel, where the evening air smelled faintly of wet paper and cabbage. He had been noticing people that day. Not in the way of a detective. No, that was the sort of thing one said when trying to explain after the fact. He had noticed, as one notices a draft that wasn't there before. The old woman with the black shopping bag who crossed the street on a red light because she did not trust green ones. The postal clerk whose tie was too new for his suit and whose fingers, beneath the counter, worried at the knot as if it were a charmed stone. There had been a man in a beige raincoat who stood for a long time in front of a shop window without looking at anything in particular. Only the rain's perseverance tied them together, like a thread going from button to button. At the next table, 2 typists from a nearby insurance office were folding their coats over their knees and sharing a plate of hard-boiled eggs sliced in half. They were talking softly, with a slightly defiant laughter at the end of certain phrases, the sort of laughter people use when they turn away from a worry they have decided to postpone. One of them kept pushing a strand of hair under her hat and touching out of habit the empty place where a ring might have been. It was then that Maigret noticed the hat. It was not his, of course. His own sat as always, brim down. The felt darkened with the same rain that had darkened the quay. This other hat was on the chair at the small table by the window, a chair that always belonged to the baker from Rue des Trois Frères when he came in at this hour for a mark. The baker was a thin man, whose wrist showed above his cuffs, and he had the habit of leaving his hat cocked over the back of the chair so he could see it while he drank. He took comfort from its presence the way blunt men take comfort from their own tools. This hat was not cocked. It lay flat on the seat, its crown dented in a way that said there had been an impatient hand. And it was on the wrong chair. The baker's chair was under the hat, but the hat's place was on the backrest, and Maigret felt the stubborn click of that knowledge the way he had felt the radiator. He did not move at once. He let the small irritation filter through him. How many times had he seen the baker, damp from his ovens, warm from flour, lean on that very chair? The sight of the hat lying on the seat was like a phrase spoiled by an extra word. It pushed at the quiet. Someone forgets, the waiter said, following his glance. All day they leave umbrellas, hats, gloves. The rain makes people generous. Who was it? Maigret asked, without interest in the answer, and yet needing the tone of the reply. A gentleman who did not finish his mark, the waiter said. He stood up when the bus stopped outside, as if he had remembered something. Then he hesitated at the door and left. He looked. There is a word, dépaysé. Out of place, Maigret murmured. Oui, like a traveller who returns to a street and finds the numbers changed. I would have gone after him, but he had already turned the corner. The waiter made a small cutting gesture with his hand. If he comes back for it, it will be here. If not, there are many heads in Paris. True, Maigret said. He reached for a cigarette and remembered he was trying not to smoke before dinner. He settled for running a thumb along the damp felt of his own hat, as if to make sure it was where he had left it. Outside, the bus heaved and moved on. One of the typists stood up, then sat down again. She had remembered something, and then forgotten it in the same instant. The brasserie's door opened to admit a gust of air, carrying the smell of wool and wet wool, which are not the same smell. A tall man in a porter's cap came in to use the telephone, his shoulders dropping with relief when the coin slid into the slot without resistance. The day had the feel of a sheet not yet turned. He could return to the office, listen to the way the building settled when the clerks thinned out and the late lamps came on. He could sit in his chair and take up a file from the pile that never became smaller, only more resigned. Or he could stay and let the rain finish, saying whatever it was saying. He was not waiting for anything exactly, when the telephone behind the counter did ring. The barman lifted it to his ear, said, "Allô?" in that way that belongs to people whose ears are trained for the shape of trouble, and turned toward Maigret with the slow smile he reserved for moments when it would be polite to ask a favor that had already been granted. "For you, Chief," he said, though there was no one in the room to impress. From the office, Maigret did not hurry. He shifted his chair, took his hat, and stood with a small stiffness in his knees that told him the damp had settled there. He lifted the receiver and said his name as if he were patient, which he was. "Pardon, Chief," came Lucas's voice, breathless as if he had been speaking quickly to someone else just before. "It is probably nothing. A woman at a little hotel on Rue Chapon telephoned. She says there is something odd about one of her lodgers. She does not want trouble. She only wants to tell it to someone who will not make trouble." "What is the something?" Maigret asked. She did not say. She said he left. "He left his hat." Lucas hesitated, hearing perhaps the smile at the corner of the chief's silence. "She said there is a hat on a chair in his room, and he has not slept there for 2 nights. The room is paid until the end of the week. She says he is punctual. She says the hat does not belong to him. Who gave you the call?" "Not you," Maigret said. "Lognon took it," Lucas admitted, and one could hear in his voice the almost affectionate resignation one has when naming a colleague's gloom. He is already on his way to explain to the woman that she should not telephone the police about hats. He says it is the rain that makes people either sentimental or suspicious. "And you?" Maigret asked. "I say it is the rain that makes Lognon more Lognon," Lucas said. "But I thought, since you are perhaps nearby, I thought you might like a walk." Maigret hung up without saying whether he liked walks, which would have been the same as asking the rain to stop out of courtesy. He left coins on the table, nodded to the waiter, and lifted the brim of his hat to the typists in the way of an old-fashioned gentleman who has not noticed that no one does that any longer. Outside, the damp took him with the same even hand with which it had taken everyone else. He turned toward Rue Chapon, because it was natural to do so. In Paris there are streets that remain ordinary no matter how often one looks at them, and it is from these that small mysteries rise like steam from a pot that does not boil. He did not quicken his step. A man who expects to live until dinner does not alter his rhythm for a hat. At the corner, he paused and looked back at the brasserie window. The hat on the wrong chair still lay where it had been left, as if testing the patience of a room. The baker would come later and push it aside with 2 fingers, not unkindly, and set his own hat in its place on the backrest, reinstating order without complaint. Perhaps the man who had forgotten the hat would return, his face puzzled by the knowledge that he had been more absent than he liked to be. Or perhaps he would not. On Rue des Blancs-Manteaux the gutters were full but not yet overflowing. A woman closed the shutters of a stationery shop with that mixture of care and fatigue that comes from a day of making change for schoolchildren. Somewhere a radio played a dance tune whose cheerfulness fought and lost a small war against the weather. He thought of Madame Maigret and the rabbit that was cooking slowly. He saw, without seeing, the white plate that would be warmed, the corner of the tablecloth that always fell a little crooked if one did not tug it. He had met his wife as one meets a climate one finds agreeable, steadily, and with thanks that required no flourish. Down Rue Chapon, the little hotel would be as it always was. Not more than 3 floors, a bell that did not ring so much as shake, a front room with a desk and a calendar that had a square around one date for a reason no one could remember. There would be a woman who avoided the word complaint and preferred, "I only thought," or "It's probably nothing, but..." He could see her hands. Oddly, he could see her hands. The rain pressed lightly on his hat. He drew his coat closer and stepped off the curb as a bicycle hissed past. the rider's back hunched around the bundle strapped there. On the opposite corner, a man struck a match under the shelter of his palm and failed, then succeeded on the second try with the quiet satisfaction of a craftsman. It was not a case yet. It was only a hat on the wrong chair, and the sensation already familiar that the day's small irritations belonged to something larger, something that would not announce itself, but would consent, eventually, got to be recognized if a man were content to walk at his normal pace and keep his hands free. The Rue Chapon Hotel had the kind of doorway one overlooks 3 times and remembers on the 4th. A narrow space smelling of boiled linen, a tired leather chair, a desk that might once have been a schoolmaster's. The bell buzzed. A rubber plant leaned toward the single pane. He pushed the door with his knuckles. The woman behind the desk rose as if untangling thread. 50-ish in a cheerful cardigan and a mouth that avoided certainties, she had dry, practical hands. The registry on the blotter was darkened by years of elbows. "I did not want to disturb the police," she began. "Monsieur Lognon told me I had in fact disturbed the police. You told us what you saw," Maigret said, setting his hat on the desk. "I like to know what people see." She glanced toward the stairs. "He arrived 6 weeks ago. Quiet. Pays every Saturday for the week following. A dark suit that does not fit the shoulders. Hands like a clerk. Appetite like a man who remembers hunger. Name? Room 9. He signed Léon Pomard. It may not be his name. Twice a week a woman visits in the afternoon. They do not quarrel. She speaks carefully as if words might stain. And now, 2 nights he has not slept here," she said. "The window is latched. The bed is made. By me the first day, by no one the second. And there is a hat on the chair that is not his." "Not his," repeated another voice, flat and gloomy from the stairs. Lognon descended with the gravity of a man hurt by other people's errors. "There is also nothing resembling a crime," he added. "We will see it," Maigret said. They climbed. The staircase accepted feet, but remembered each. Room 9's keyhole had a brass lip, polished by anonymous patience. The woman produced a key on a fish-shaped fob. "Forgive me," she said. "I air it each morning. An iron bed that made no promises, a washstand with a settled crack, a table by the window with a lamp under a green shade." The air smelled of clean water and something faintly sweet. On the chair by the table sat the hat. Brown felt a little too soft, with a band tightened by a frugal finger. "A nick on the brim. He does not wear such a hat," the woman whispered. "His is black, firmer. I brush it when he asks. This is lighter. When I came up the first morning, it sat as you see it. I thought he had bought a new one. But the size is wrong. His is larger." "People exchange hats," Lognon said. "People forget hats." Maigret let silence settle, then lifted the hat. Inside the band, faint, the name of a department store gone out of fashion 10 years earlier. A cheap, sweet tobacco smell. A single pale hair clung to the lining, short and straight. "You clean thoroughly," Maigret said. "Try as I do," she said. "I do not enter drawers." "Has anyone been asking for him?" "Only the woman. She came yesterday at 4. She knocked, then kept her hand on the knob as if to turn it by wanting. When I told her he was not in, she said, 'Of course.' Then she laughed without pleasure and sat in the office until the rain became less personal. She smoked 1 cigarette and left it half-finished. Describe her. Dark coat too thin for the season, shoes that have learned to be careful. No ring. A mouth as if she bit it when young and continued. She always carries a small parcel, wrapped as if the wrapping were the point." Maigret set the hat back and sat on the bed as if listening for the room's explanation. The washstand held an open razor. The soap's center was still damp. Near the lamp lay a manual of accounting. "A clerk," he said. "Or a man who wants to be one, or wants to seem one," Lognon muttered. "What does that give us?" "No blood. Do you mind blood so much?" "I mind rain more." The window gave onto a courtyard where lines crossed like arguments abandoned mid-sentence. On the sill, a film of dust had received a recent finger. He opened the window. The air tasted of rust and steam. On the outside ledge, a ring of damp marked where something, perhaps a glass, had rested. "He takes tea sometimes," the woman offered, pointing to a dented tin. He closed the window. He could feel the days, up at 7, out at 8, back at 6. A woman at 4 on some afternoons. A hat left by a stranger 2 days ago. A bed that had known only one body. "He may return tonight," Lognon said. "He may telephone or not. You will wait. Madame will worry her buttons, and I will fill a form no one will read." "Perhaps." Where does he work? I do not know, she said. The rent envelope sometimes smells of ink and glue. There are the shoes, Maigret said. Polished and old, heels repaired by a careful hand. The laces were newer than the leather. A man who repairs before he replaces. He told me, the woman said, that he does not eat in restaurants because the portions are decided by people who do not know him. It is a reason. I will leave him a note, Maigret said, and took a page from the blotter. He wrote, Monsieur Pomard, kindly telephone the Quai des Orfèvres or leave word with Madame. He added his name. He pinned the note to the green shade. The hat sat mild and compromising. And the woman, the hotelier asked, if she returns, ask her to wait. Offer tea. Do not change anything. Back in the lobby, the registry lay open at a Tuesday 3 weeks earlier. Rain ticked the pane. Maigret replaced his hat and felt his shoulders loosen beneath the coat. He did not yet have a name more interesting than Pomard, nor a reason worth announcing, but he had the knowledge of a room that had refused a man, and a hat settled where it had no right to be. He stepped into the street. He turned not toward the quay at once, but toward Rue du Temple, where a tobacconist saw more than he sold, and where, if he walked at the pace of a man thinking of dinner, he might meet a woman with a parcel who preferred to be unnoticed. The next step would be small and sufficient. The tobacconist on Rue du Temple had a window full of paper pyramids and a cat that slept on a ledger near the till. When Maigret entered, a bell rang like a spoon tapped lightly against glass. The man behind the counter had a face that had given up on novelty and a mustache that did. It's best to suggest authority. You're late for the newspapers, he said without looking up. I'm early for a conversation, Maigret answered, laying his palms on the glass and letting the warmth from inside climb into his sleeves. The rain had softened to a fine dust that made collars feel woollier. The tobacconist nodded toward the cat, which opened one eye and then decided to trust the room. We have conversations, the man conceded. They pay less than cigarettes. Do many of your customers pay in envelopes that smell of glue? The moustache twitched. The post office is 2 streets over. Everyone smells of glue at this hour. A man calling himself Léon Pomard, Maigret said, watching the leaflets that advertised rationed luxuries. Quiet, brown hair tending to thin. He buys without speaking, as if speaking would oblige the shop to answer. Caporal, not Maryland, the tobacconist said after a moment. Paper cut in halves to last the week. He pockets the stub of twine I bind the packet with. Not miserly. Attentive. He comes evenings when I'm sweeping. He taps the cat's head and says, Mademoiselle, with a care that doesn't suit his suit. He has not come for 2 nights. The man tilted his chin toward the door, where Rain wrote slow sentences. It is a city of nights. He may be sick. He may be away. And a woman with a parcel. Dark coat. Shoes that think before stepping. She comes on Tuesdays and Fridays. Today is Thursday. She buys nothing but asks for matches, then doesn't strike them. She watches the street from here, as if the street were the client and she the clerk. What does she smell of? What does she smell of? Vinegar and starch, the tobacconist said, surprised by his own certainty. And sometimes very faintly violets from last year's bottle. Does she speak of hats? Maigret asked. The man laughed with his nose. People speak of hats when they have heads for them. She has a head for keeping things level. Maigret thanked him and stepped back onto the pavement. The light had thinned to the kind that puts faces on the inside of windows. He did not hurry. The woman, if she came, would neither be drawn by haste nor frightened by stillness. He placed himself across the street under a cafe awning, where a percolator worked at something like optimism. The boy clearing tables sang under his breath and lost the tune twice. At 20 minutes to 7, a figure turned from the direction of Rue Chapon and paused at the tobacconist's door. Not to enter, but to read the sign that had not changed. She was as described. Dark coat too thin, parcel the size of a book under her arm, shoes that evaluated puddles instead of stepping in them. Her hair was pinned as if by someone who had learned the technique alone and late. She pressed the door with her wrist and went inside. Through the glass, Maigret saw the exchange. The request for matches, the refusal of cigarettes, the cat's deliberate indifference. She spoke a sentence too long to be about matches. The tobacconist shook his head once. Her mouth made the shape of thanks and she came out, turning her face into the narrow dryness under the awning. You are early for Friday, Maigret said. She had the reflex to glance past him. as if someone else might be the object of such a remark. Then the resignation to answer what had been said. "Today feels like Friday," she replied. "Days behave badly in the rain," he agreed. "May I walk with you a little?" She weighed him without interest in his comfort. "If you walk like a man who doesn't need to arrive anywhere." "That is my specialty." They set out along Rue du Temple, where the traffic had become a procession of lights with intentions. He did not ask her name. Their footsteps synchronized in that Paris way that makes strangers seem rehearsed. "You were going to the hotel," he said. "Sometimes I go there and discover I have gone somewhere else." "Room 9. Always the same room," she said, and after a pause added, "Not mine." The parcel under her arm shifted. She steadied it with her chin. "Have you been inside?" "The bed approves of tidiness. There is a manual of accounting." "A tin for tea. A razor that believes in mornings." "You make things sound as if they had souls," she said, not unkindly. "He does not. He can be punctual." "Punctuality is a way of limiting harm," she answered. "He will not be late because lateness might cause someone to wait, and he cannot stand the thought of being measured." "You are precise," Maigret observed. "I iron," she said simply. "Precision belongs to people who iron for others." They passed a hardware shop, where 2 lamps burned like thoughts that had not yet found phrases. On the pavement, a broken chalk line suggested a game abandoned for weather. The parcel under her arm made a gentle squeak, like paper speaking to paper. "Will he come back tonight?" Maigret asked. "If he meant to, he would have already," she said, not looking at him. "Unless he wants me to wait." "And does he?" "Wanting is not his strong point. He prefers arrangements that do not require wanting." She stopped at a crossing and watched a bus lean with effort. "I am talking too much because you are not," she added. He took out his pipe, turned it in his hand, and slid it back again. At the hotel, a hat sits on his chair. It is not his. It smells of sweet tobacco. He smokes Caparol, the tobacconist says. She had been about to step off the curb. At the word hat, she did not stop, but her shoe found a dry place with more care than before. "I do not know his hats," she said after they had crossed. "I know his shirts. I know the white one that has turned grey because he does not like to surrender it. I know his socks, which think they are still pairs after they are not. Hats are for men when they are visible. You bring parcels." He nodded at the wrapping. "I mend and return. That is our arrangement. He does not like to keep clothing in places where other people might look. He wears things until they have forgotten their shops." "Your name?" he asked finally. She glanced at him as if at a little discourtesy that could be allowed. "Colette Vasseur," she said. "There are many women with that name. If you wish, choose another for me and keep this one for your papers." "Madame or Mademoiselle Vasseur?" "Mademoiselle." "But I have been called Madame by men who find it easier to be careful that way." They had reached the small square, where a chestnut tree did its best to convince pigeons that manners were possible. She sat on a bench whose slats kept their own counsel, and placed the parcel on her knees, hands flat upon it. "You are the police," she said without question. "Yes." "You think the hat means a man. I think the hat means a promise. He has no money for promises. He borrows caution and pays it back with punctuality. Has he spoken of leaving?" Maigret asked. She traced the string with a finger. "He speaks of not being seen. That is a kind of leaving. Once he said, 'If you do not exist in people's minds, you do not owe them anything.' Then he apologized, which he does frequently because he has learned that apologies make rooms quieter." "Where does he work?" "A small firm near the markets on a 3rd floor that trembles when the tram passes. They copy invoices for larger firms to feel larger. He balances others' numbers. He is good at cancelling out. And you?" "I take in laundry from women who sell hats they cannot afford to own," she said with the hint of a smile. "And from men who use starch to make their collars remember youth." "Tuesday and Friday," he said. "Because those are the days people remember their appearances," she replied. "He chose them for me. He would never set a time that might force me into conversation on a crowded stair." "Did he carry a glass to the window?" Maigret asked. "There is a ring on the outside sill. He stands to drink because the chair creaks," she said. "He thinks creaking will draw attention." They sat for a time with the measured patience of people waiting for the rain to decide whether to become something else. A clock from somewhere reputable struck 7. She lifted the parcel a little, as if checking its weight had not changed under their talk. "If he has not slept there," she said at last, "he has found a place where sleeping feels like someone else's duty." There is a cafe near the canal where men sit long because the owner sells time cheap. Or he is at the office pretending the night is a column to be added to a column. Is there someone who would make him visible? Maigret asked. A creditor, an enemy, a friend who talks too loudly? She shook her head. He is too careful to be loved loudly. That is his tragedy and his relief. When you left the hotel yesterday, he said, you sat with the concierge until the rain became less personal. She is one of those women Rain chooses first. I waited with her so she would feel chosen in company. He stood. The square smelled faintly of wet stone and last week's pastry. If he sends word, you will know it before I do, he said. Tell me if the parcel ever reaches its destination. She rose as well. If I told you more, it would be my story, she said. And that is not what you want. What I want, he said, is to understand why a man who makes himself small leaves behind something that says he had breadth once. Hats do that, she murmured. They keep the shape of days under rain. They walked back toward Rue Chapon at the same pace, then parted with a nod that belonged to a quieter century. In the lobby, the concierge looked up, with the look of someone trying to remember whether she had moved the ashtray. No telephone message. The note still pinned to the lamp. The hat still on the chair, mild as a guest who has decided to outstay politeness. On the street again, Maigret turned his steps toward home. The rabbit would be surrendering to the mustard. He would change his damp cuffs for dry ones and eat slowly while Madame listened without interrupting. Then later, he would return to the office where Lucas would have nothing to report and be pleased to report it. Somewhere between the soup and the cheese, he thought, the shape of the hat would place itself upon a head he had already seen today. In a window where a man in a beige raincoat stood not looking at anything in particular. He arrived home earlier than the rabbit expected. The apartment smelled of mustard, softening its sharpness. Madame Maigret wiped her hands on a towel and looked not at him first, but at the hat he placed on the sideboard. You're on time, she said. Then it must be an unimportant case. Not yet a case, he said. A hat in a room, a man who prefers to be less present than his belongings, a woman who irons precision into things. The Republic is safe, she murmured. Wash. The rabbit is at the moment before it asks to be left alone. They ate without hurry. He spoke when she asked, leaving out the parts that wanted to be clever. She listened the way housewives listen when the soup needs time. A hat left in a room that is not its room, she said. People leave hats when they are thinking about their heads, or when someone else has been thinking about their heads for them. She poured more wine. Do men still change hats when they change selves? At the cleaners, they pinned papers inside, and sometimes they arrived swapped. The men recognized their own by the feel until they tried them. The concierge says the hat isn't his. She is rarely wrong about the weight of people's objects. It's the weight that gives people away, Madame said. Coats, bags. A woman who carries a parcel as if it contained an excuse, that is different from a woman who carries bread. How does she carry hers? As if the string were an obligation, he said. She brings parcels to be mended and returned. Today isn't one of her days, but she went anyway. She had something to compare, Madame said, or she wanted to be seen not on her day. That's when habits speak. He broke bread and collected a trace of mustard. There's also a man in a beige raincoat who looks at windows without seeing them. There are many, she said, but only some who do it as a new habit. When a person begins to practice absence, the shoulders tell it. After dinner, she wiped the oilcloth with firm circles. You'll go back, she said. They'll be disappointed at the office if I don't do them the courtesy of finding nothing. Take a scarf, she said. You already walk like a man who knows where the wet is kept in his bones. He kissed her cheek and left with the sense, familiar as his pipe, that he had been corrected about something he could not yet name. At the Quai des Orfèvres, the corridors had their evening echo. Lucas, sleeves rolled, was teaching the telephone not to be dramatic. Nothing, Lucas said cheerfully. Lognon, in a mood to pity the future. He went home to do it privately. Send a man to the firm near the markets, Maigret said. Third floor, trembling when the tram passes. Ask whether their Clark Pommard has become a column that doesn't add. At this hour? He may be there tasting the night for numbers. Lucas telephoned. Closed. No one since 5. The woman says he likes places where sleeping is someone else's duty. The canal? Le Zodiac, Lucas said. Time sold in small glasses. Send. Janvier there for an hour, quietly, and asked the brigade about a hat. With a department store label out of fashion, they'll be grateful for the romance. Let them keep it if they return with the hat. At 9 he went out again. The rain had become the city's slow breathing. He did not go by the canal at once. He walked toward the boulevard where he had seen the beige raincoat earlier, the window displaying men's shirts folded into patience. The shop was closed. In the doorway a footprint was drying inward, as when someone has waited long enough for doubt to grow comfortable. Across the street, a small cafe practiced insomnia. He ordered a coffee and watched the window. At 9:10, the beige raincoat returned. He came as men come who have not decided whether to be lost, shoulders polite toward the head, hatless, hair combed with fingers. He stopped before the window and made the shape of looking without choosing an object. He had the hush of someone repeating a sentence, because the words refused to take their places. Maigret let him stand. He took out a cigarette, put it away, then left it unlit between his lips. He slid a hand into his pocket, withdrew nothing, returned it, considered leaving, did not. When he moved, it was only into the doorway. He rested his shoulder against the jamb like a tired thought against the edge of a decision. He pressed his palm to the glass once, quickly, as if asking whether warmth could be borrowed. Maigret left coins and crossed without haste. Close he smelled of damp cardboard and sweet tobacco. "Good evening," Maigret said. He turned. His eyes were careful. He looked at Maigret's hat, then his face, and accepted both as facts. "I've missed the closing," he said, inclining his head toward the shirts. "It happens every night at the same hour," Maigret said. "Sometimes we hope repetition will change its mind. Rarely. You like to look at things that do not move. They are restful. And cheaper," Maigret said gently. He nodded once. The raincoat was clean but tired. A small scar at his hairline looked like punctuation. "You smoke something sweet," Maigret observed. "Scaffalati do," he said. "An old department store sold your hat." "I have several bad habits," he said, embarrassed. "Losing is one. Tonight you've lost what?" "Time," he said with a lift of the shoulders. "And perhaps the habit of going home. Do you have an address for that habit?" He looked toward the river he could not see. "A small hotel," he said. "For now. Room 9, perhaps." His head tipped almost a bow. "So we are there," he said. "We have been there since 6, Maigret said. "I am Maigret." "I thought so," he replied. "I have not done anything that can be folded into papers." "People rarely do," Maigret said. "It is the folds that make the paper interesting." His hand rose and fell as if reaching for a brim. "My name is not Pomard," he said. "I borrowed it from a bottle because no one asked me to drink it. My name is Etienne. Etienne Breard. The rain listened with them tonight. Who brought you a hat that isn't yours, Etienne?" Maigret asked, and let the rain finish the sentence for him. Breard's gaze did not leave the reflection that held the two of them in the dark glass. He considered his own outline as if it were a suit on a wooden form. "It wasn't brought," he said at last. "It was left. I found it on my chair when I returned from washing at the end of the hall." It looked like a decision put down to rest. "You didn't move it. I have learned not to disturb arrangements that don't mention me by name." "Who had the key?" Maigret asked. "The concierge," he said with the tiniest apology, "and anyone who can make a door patient. Someone entered while you were washing. The corridor is short. You would have heard steps. The tap sings when old pipes work," he replied. "And I let it." "Because you expected someone," Maigret said mildly. "Because I sometimes prefer to be expected to expect," he answered. "They'd keep surprises from thinking too well of themselves." They began to walk not far to the corner, where the awning gave them a small roof. A tram, late and slightly offended at being late, muttered along the boulevard. Behind the shirt shop, a caretaker slammed a gate with the finality of a book closing. "Why not sleep in your room?" Maigret asked when the sound died. "I saw the hat and felt observed," Etienne said simply. "Observation is a mirror sharper than I can afford." I went out to the canal and sat among men who outsourced their silences. I returned at daybreak and found nothing altered but my sense of having done something definite. And the second night. I tried to do it again, to see whether repetition would turn it into habit. I failed at the conviction required. He shivered as one does when the body consults the weather and finds it unanimous. Maigret signaled toward the sleepless cafe. Inside, the waiter arranged cups like polite soldiers. They took a table near the window, where the glass remembered 100 foreheads. "2 coffees," Maigret said. And something to make them seem warmer. Tartines, the waiter suggested. Bread, Etienne murmured. Bread is a good listener. The waiter departed. Maigret took off his hat and placed it brim down, ordinary among ordinary things. The hat in your room, he said, smells of sweet tobacco. You smoke sweet tobacco. You could have said it was yours. I could have said many things, Etienne admitted. The truth is less varied but lasts longer. My hats are taller in the crown. I have a head that liked to be taller when I was 20. Where did you learn to leave space around yourself, Etienne? In a boarding school with varnished floors and boys allergic to confusion, he said, not bitterly. Later in offices where the air has numbers in it and people avoid nouns. The bread came and they ate with the attention of men who respect what goes on a plate because it has had a journey. Coffee breathed up to their faces. A woman carries parcels to you, Maigret said. He smiled with a kind of gratitude that looked borrowed. Colette! She knows how to give shirts the memory of being new without pretending too hard. She brings them back, speaking softly. You did not tell her you would not be in, Maigret said. Telling has consequences, Etienne said. Not telling has consequences I can manage. Words attach. Absences diffuse. For whom was the hat intended? For me, he said after a pause. Not as a gift, as a sentence. It says your name is written inside by hands you did not hire. You recognize the writing? The stores, he said. Not the year. 10 years is a century for department stores. Who knew you would be washing at that hour? Anyone who has listened to me close the door at 6:49, he said, the precision without pride. You see, I'm an easy man to anticipate if one cares to. Does anyone care to? He hesitated. He lifted a corner of the tartine, as if it weighed more when one thought of it. A man came to the office 2 weeks ago. He wore a tie that could not remember a knot. He asked questions not about our work, but about me. He said he had heard that I was a patient man. And you were. Patience is cheaper than resistance, he said. I told him today's date, my hours, the days I don't come early. He left satisfied and touched the doorframe as if doors offended him. What did he want? He wanted me to know he existed, Etienne said. He kept his hands empty so my eye would try to fill them. And his hat? Black, city black. Not the hat in my room. Sweet tobacco. None. He smelled of soap that had not made up its mind to be a scent. Name. He gave one, Etienne said. Riveau. Like the river with an extra letter to be particular. He spoke the extra letter as if it were money. The waiter cleared the crumbs as one gathers proofs. Outside, the rain softened another degree, finding a smaller instrument to play. You chose the name Pomard, Maigret said, to make yourself uninteresting. It is a wine men mention when they wish to be forgiven for liking something, Etienne said. I envied that. You work on the 3rd floor that trembles. When trams pass, he nodded. It steadies me. You have debts? I have ordinary debts, the kind that make honest men glance at cupboards. But no one calls for them at night. Enemies? Of a kind, he said. People for whom I represent arithmetic they have avoided. They resent my existence. They would not enter my room to leave a hat. The cafe's door opened, and a draught lifted a paper napkin that had thought itself heavier. A couple came in arguing in the professional way of people who practice staying together. The city hummed in its pocket. Why do you look at shirts? Maigret asked. They are arranged, Etienne said. Order made visible reassures. Men who suspect chaos will always win. A telephone rang, somewhere in the back, and was answered by a voice. That had not expected to be needed. You will come to the hotel tonight, Maigret said. I will follow you, Etienne said. It is easier than leading myself. They paid. On the sidewalk the rain was a rumor. They walked without speaking. Their steps made an arrangement too simple to notice. Rue Chapon had folded into its habitual thinness. The concierge looked up, not surprised by 2 men where one might have been sufficient. You have a message, she told Maigret, tapping the registry as if it were a telegram. A man telephoned at 9:30. He asked if the hat was still where he had left it. I told him I did not run a cloakroom. He laughed and said the hat would know what to do. His voice? Maigret asked. Not young, not old. The kind that sits in the chest because the throat is tired, she said. He swallowed before he laughed. Did he give a name? He said, Tell Monsieur Pomard we are even. And he hung up. They looked at Etienne, who did not look back at them, but at the staircase. Even for what? Maigret asked. For seeing me, Etienne said. He thinks I owe him visibility. You recognize the voice? I recognize the swallow, he said. Rifo did it when he lied about his work. What is his work? Finding men who prefer to be small and offering them reasons to be larger for a fee, Etienne said. He said he facilitates introductions. I believed he facilitates discomfort. Did you refuse something? I refused to owe him gratitude, Etienne said. He offered a problem and a solution in the same breath. I said I preferred problems without a salesman. Then he left a hat, Maigret said. As an introduction to an introduction. They climbed to room 9. The air had the inertia of rooms that have spent hours conserving absences. The note on the lamp looked more official than it intended. The hat sat exactly as before. Etienne did not cross the threshold at once. He let the room recognize him. I will stay, he said, as if telling the chair, at least for this hour. Maigret took the hat, turned it once and set it back with the care of returning a borrowed word to its sentence. He went to the window, opened it. The courtyard's lines stretched like string tied to patience. Somewhere a radio practiced a dance tune nobody intended to dance. If he telephones again, Maigret said, you will ask him to meet you somewhere you don't belong. Le Zodiac, Etienne said. It sells time cheap. Tell him midnight. Cheap time is braver then. And if he comes? We will see how he wears his hat, Maigret said. The concierge brought up a blanket because blankets answer questions men do not ask. Etienne sat on the bed as if trying not to bend it. Maigret remained by the window, smoking a pipe he did not light. The hat on the chair seemed to listen, the way objects listen when they are the subject and the people the audience. Downstairs the telephone rang, once, then again, as if practicing. The concierge called up, breath held tight. Monsieur, he asks if Monsieur Pomar is in to receive his property. Tell him, Maigret said evenly, that the hat accepts midnight by the canal. The concierge repeated the message, as if each word had a weight she did not wish to drop. When she hung up, the lobby resumed its patient breath. Etienne looked at the hat as if it had suggested the hour itself, and he nodded, not to Maigret but to the chair. Midnight was a time even the timid could explain to themselves. Too late for errands, too early for sleep, one respected. We'll go separately, Maigret said. You first, as if you had decided by yourself. I'll follow after the air has forgotten the shape of us together. Etienne stood, smoothed a non-existent crease and took nothing with him. He paused in the doorway, then reached back, and with the smallest of gestures shifted the hat a finger's width. It was not defiance. It was a man setting one detail to rights, so a larger disorder would not feel invited. His steps on the stairs were as discreet as rain, avoiding a tin roof. Maigret waited until the corridor regained its ordinary length. He listened to the room the way one listens to a shell, for an echo that belongs to another place. The lamp made a soft pool. On its shade his note looked like a thought reconsidering itself. He. Close the window, not tight. Rooms should breathe when men intend to lie convincingly later. In the lobby he asked the concierge to keep the telephone off its rest for a few minutes. The old trick of making callers believe the wire had chosen to be silent. Outside, the city had changed instruments again. The rain had moved higher, fine enough to be taken for mist from the canal. The streets leading there were thin with purposeful figures, baker's assistants taking Flower's temperature, a night guard who walked like a metronome, a young man in his fur suit rehearsing important phrases he would not get to use. The canal itself held the lamps like coins in a quiet dish. Le Zodiac's windows glowed with the faint stubbornness of establishments that rely on stubbornness. Inside, the floorboards knew each regular by weight. The owner, a man whose eyebrows did most of his greeting, slid a glance toward the door when Etienne entered. No surprise. Time sells better when the seller looks like he expects you. Etienne sat at a small table near the mirror, where reflections took on the fatigue of those who supplied them. He ordered a small beer he would not finish. His hands were flat, as if holding down a paper that had thoughts about lifting off. Maigret took the opposite wall, half in shadow, the way policemen do when they wish to be less important than the conversation. He had left his hat at the coat stand, as much to avoid a signal as because the air felt better on his forehead. From there he could see the door, the bar, the mirror, and the canal through the glass, like a sentence written in reverse. He lit his pipe and did not draw, letting the smoke spool and fail as if thinking. At 11:45 a man came who wore no hat and carried his shoulders carefully around his head. He stopped inside the threshold, less to look than to let the place look at him. The swallow was there before the greeting. The throat performed it, as if remembering a lesson taught by someone who had not been patient. He moved toward Etienne without hurry, not avoiding eyes, not seeking them either. He had a face one could pass a dozen times, and recognize each time an instant too late. "Good evening, Monsieur Pomard," he said. "Or the wine is finished." "Evening, Monsieur Rivaux." Etienne returned and lifted the foamless beer an inch. Rivaux sat. He placed his empty hands on the table with the candor of empty hands. His tie this time had learned its not better. He smiled as if to say he was not a man to force brightness upon anyone. Up close, the soap had made a decision and lost it. Beneath was a hint of something metallic, like a coin warmed in the pocket too long. "You sent a message by hat," Etienne said. "I returned property," Rivaux corrected. "We had an understanding. Your discretion for my courtesy." I did not accept the understanding. Etienne spoke without challenge, like a clerk reciting hours. "Acceptance is overrated," Rivaux said amiably. "There are arrangements that work best when only one of us admits to them. It keeps the other one polite." Maigret let the words pass and watched the spaces between them. The owner polished a glass in the way one calms a horse. Two men at the bar were conducting a long dispute, with a short vocabulary about a match they had not both seen. By the window, a woman in a beret counted her coins 3 times, and each time they came to the same amount, which did not please her. "What do you want, monsieur?" Etienne asked. "It is late for wanting," Rivaux said. "I prefer acts. There is a man who believes you have seen him when he wished to be heir. He would be relieved if you forgot. I am here to facilitate relief. And the hat? A token. Proof that I knew where to speak to you in your absence." He leaned back and surveyed his own phrase with satisfaction. "You have made yourself small and soft like bread. Men like you are resistant to teeth, but you bruise. I am a considerate man. I prefer to leave no marks. Whom have I seen?" Etienne asked. "If you know, why ask? If you don't, why worry?" Rivaux smiled the particular smile of men who believe ambiguity protects them from payment. "But you have eyes. You look at windows. You look into offices. You write numbers that explain people to themselves. Sometimes numbers refuse to explain," Etienne said. "Then you add a hat," Rivaux murmured. The swallow again. That small concession the body made when the mind risked being ahead of the tongue. He glanced around with a faint impatience, not for danger but for inefficiency. His gaze passed over Maigret, paused not at the man but at the absence of a hat where a hat might have been, and moved on. He lifted a hand to order a drink, then let it fall. His hands wished to hold a glass without committing to the wet. "You can be even," he said to Etienne. "There is a little paper you were given to copy." "You did not." "Good. Tomorrow you give it to me instead, and our account is closed." He slid a slip across the table with his fingertip. Not a page, no, only an address, a time, the name of a café that had recently changed proprietors. Etienne glanced but did not touch. "You mistake me for a man in a play," he said. "I do not exchange papers in cafés. I avoid nouns in daylight. You accepted a room under another name. You are convertible," Rivaux said. "No one will suffer. The paper exists to confirm what is already true. You will have done a thing that cannot be seen, and if I refuse, in that case you will have to be seen, perhaps by men who carry hats and knock softly and ask to come in. They will stand in your room long enough to make the bed feel looked at. Your concierge will develop opinions. The woman with parcels will acquire a reason to watch your staircase at hours when a staircase feels like a witness." He spoke without heat, as if enumerating items in a drawer across the room. The clock above the mirror counted without caring who listened. The canal outside had the indifference of large objects used to outlasting everyone. Maigret took off his pipe and rubbed the bowl with his thumb. The owner dried the same place on the glass again. It shone as if convinced. The two men at the bar reached an agreement to disagree. They both drank. Etienne said nothing. His breath became shallow in the manner of a man measuring his chest with air. He touched the edge of the table, then took his hand away as if it might leave a print that would complicate things. Twice he looked at the door and did not rise. "Midnight," Rivaux noted, glancing at the clock. "An hour for endings that feel like beginnings." He stood, not quickly, and adjusted his tie, which did not need it. He left the slip where it lay, and placed a coin on the table as if he had purchased something. "Tomorrow at 6, Rue Beaubourg. A back room. No ceremony. He took a step, then another, and there he was at the door, becoming the outside again. The swallow remained in the air after him, like the silence left by a cough no one wants to claim. Maigret crossed only when the door had sighed shut. He did not sit. He stood as one might between a man and a window. Etienne looked up at him as if the hat invisible here had spoken. "Did you copy a paper?" Maigret asked. "A list," Etienne said, "of deliveries that did not travel. Someone wrote numbers to explain that travel and arrival were identical. They were not. I brought the list to my pocket and then to the bottom of a drawer. That is the extent of my heroism. You saw a name. I saw a name I have been careful not to know," Etienne replied. "If I say it, I will own it. If I own it, I will have to choose between 2 rooms." Maigret nodded. He covered the slip with 2 fingers, then slid it back fully toward Etienne. "Keep this. Let him believe you are considering. Tomorrow you will go to Rue Beaubourg. You will sit where he tells you. You will not bring any paper. And you? I will be nearby like weather." Etienne watched him a long heartbeat, then his shoulders sagged with a relief that was not relief, and a resignation that did not claim to be noble. "He will look for a hat," he said almost whimsically. "He will find one on a different chair," Maigret answered. He placed a coin on the table beside Rivaux's, making the small equality in a language all 3 understood, and touched Etienne's forearm with 2 fingers, a gesture gentle enough not to wake any fear that had decided to rest. Outside, the canal had thin mist rising, like names that refused to stay on paper. He walked alone toward the quay, hands in his pockets, hat under his arm for once. He did not quicken his step. The case, if it was one, continued to prefer small movements, the kind that assembled themselves later and called themselves fate. Up on Rue Chapon, a hat waited on a chair, not its chair, as patient as a clue that knows time emboldens the quiet. He slept as one dozes in a carriage, aware of stations not to miss. The dream was administrative, corridors ending in themselves, a pen that would not write and then drowned a page. Morning arrived undecorated. He changed damp cuffs, watched the kettle boil. Madame set a bowl and bread, the knife wiped twice for ritual. She looked at his face before his hat. "You'll stand in a doorway today," she said. "I usually do." "You'll think you wait for a man," she went on, pouring coffee as if measuring warmth. "But you'll be waiting for his reason. Those arrive last. Those arrive last." "He swallows before he lies," he said. "Then give him water," she replied. He told her about the hat, the canal, Rue Beaubourg. "Hats are like reasons," she concluded. "If they don't fit, they leave a ring." At the quay, corridors busied themselves to resist patience. Lucas appeared with a dossier. "Janvier watched the canal till 1, he reported. "Your man left alone. The owner says Rivaux sells usefulness by the hour. And the 3rd-floor firm? Confirms Bread under Pommard. Competent, invisible, punctual enough to offend. At 5 I want 2 men near Rue Beaubourg," Maigret said. "Unremarkable. If they look like policemen, send them to buy onions." He phoned the hotel. "If Mademoiselle Vasseur came, ask her to look at the chair before any parcel climbed the stairs." He walked the streets around Rue Beaubourg and let corners introduce themselves. The cafe's new sign was still deciding. A woman washed the step. Opposite, a printer hammered shutters. In a reflection, he measured the back room. 1 bulb, a beach calendar no Parisian would trust, a door to a short corridor likely ending in a chain. At noon he ate a sausage and a potato. No wine. Near 4, Colette Vasseur appeared, her parcel smaller. She walked like a person intentionally early. He let her pass and entered the hotel after her. The concierge waved in both. "He won't be back before 6, the concierge said. "I know," Colette answered. To Maigret, "You'll stand in a doorway today." "So they tell me." She untied the parcel. A clean shirt lay inside and beneath a small brown packet. She pushed it to him. "He asked me to give you his habit." Inside, a pencil stub, a corner torn from a ledger, a metro ticket punched twice. On the paper, 55375. "He counts minutes," she said. 5 to the door, 5 to the canal, 3 with the mirror, 7 to refuse the beer, 5 to stand and not leave. "Tell him 6 at the cafe," Maigret said. "No paper. Bring only the minutes." He walked to Rue Beaubourg by a route that could be defended as accidental. From a kiosk he called Lucas. "Place Janvier at the printers across from the cafe. If Rivaux brings friends, notice their shoes and whom they try not to resemble." "Understood," Lucas said. At 5:30, the café aimed its chairs at the street. Maigret took a table near the door. At 5:47, Etienne arrived empty-handed, faintly relieved to see nothing happening. "Nothing happening is our talent," Maigret said. Etienne sat with his back to the wall. At 6 precisely, a man in a cap who wasn't a waiter opened the backroom door and entered with his shoulder. Behind him, a second man brought cultivated silence. Then Rivaux came the way an idea joins a conversation, while disclaiming authorship. He paused to inventory chairs, windows, exits he would later swear he hadn't seen, and gave the room his swallow like a signature. Maigret dipped his chin. Across the street, Janvier closed a sample book. Etienne stood without hurry. As if carried by a current he preferred to call a path. He looked once at Maigret, as if to say he had counted to 5 already, and passed into the back room. The door closed. The café resumed, pretending it was a café. The clock above the mirror refused to be hurried. After 2 minutes, Maigret rose and crossed the room. He noted the new lock, the gap at the threshold, the short corridor ending in a chain. He returned and asked for the telephone. "2 plain coats, Rue Michel Lecomte," he said. "Stand where a hurried man would step." He set a glass of water on the table nearest the back-room door and sat beside it, the way a man sits beside his hat, and listened to the street breathing outside softly. Minutes passed. A laugh arrived without a face. A chair scuffed. Then nothing. The air thickened as it does when money is offered like a remedy. The door opened a hand's width. Rivaux showed his head not to look, but to tell the rest of him the air remained ordinary. He closed it. Maigret watched the joinery and thought of hats, how they keep shape after the head is gone. When the door opened properly, the second man emerged first, carrying emptiness like a package. He scanned the room in a way meant to resemble indifference. Maigret stared past him at the window until the man selected his own reflection. He held the door with his heel. Rivaux came out smiling as men smile who have made someone sensible against his better sense. Etienne did not appear. Small weight dropped in Maigret's chest. He stood. "Good evening again," he said. "Chief," Rivaux replied. "You choose cafes well." "They choose me," Maigret said. "Where is our friend?" "In reasonable company," Rivaux answered. "He has signed nothing. We agreed on a procedure. He will go home by the long street and count to 5 many times." "Your procedure has a back door," Maigret said. "As do most rooms," Rivaux replied. Maigret held his silence. He shifted half a pace as if making room for a hat to pass. "We are even," Rivaux said softly. "Tell Monsieur Pomard." "Tell him yourself," Maigret answered, and moved enough to block the shortest path if asked twice. Rivaux smiled smaller and gestured toward the street. The cabman scuffed the threshold. The second man kept his hands theatrically empty. The back room held air and a chair angled toward the wall as if listening. Etienne stood by the table, pale, intact, a paper before him that had not been touched. "I said no," he murmured. "I heard you," Maigret replied. He folded the empty sheet and slid it into his pocket like a hat on a peg. "Now we'll see who truly believes we're even, and who has left his hat on the wrong chair for the last time." The back room exhaled after they left, as if relieved to return to its usual neglect. The bulb overhead flickered once and then steadied, its light making everything look both temporary and permanent. Etienne was still by the table, one hand on its edge, his knuckles pale as if gripping the idea of stability. He hadn't sat. The untouched sheet lay where it had been placed, but the air above it seemed heavier for what had almost happened. "You said no," Maigret repeated, his voice low, steady, like water moving against a dock. "I said it once." "Then again," Etienne answered. "The second time was for myself. The first was only a sound in the air. You were alone. They wanted me to copy a name from their page onto mine, to make it seem as if the page had traveled through my hand. Rivaux said it would prove I belonged to something I could never be accused of. I told him that belonging was already too much work." "You said it calmly." "As calmly as a man who counts his minutes," Etienne admitted, attempting a smile that failed. "He called me ungrateful. He said he would leave the score open." "Even yet open," Maigret murmured. He folded the blank sheet once, twice, until it was small enough to slip into his pocket. It is the kind of arithmetic men like him prefer. Outside the café, dusk had taken on its familiar grey that belonged to the streets more than to the sky. Janvier was still across the way, leaning in the printer's doorway, playing his part as a man with nothing to sell. When Maigret stepped out, Janvier straightened only enough to signal he had seen the trio depart earlier. They turned up Rue Michel Lecomte, Janvier said when Maigret crossed to him. No hurry. One of them whistled. They looked lighter than when they came. Lightness can be heavy, Maigret answered. Follow them until they decide you're too dull to notice. Keep your eyes on their shoes. Their faces will lie first. He motioned Etienne along, and they walked back toward the Seine without talking, each listening to the rhythm of the other's steps. At the corner where the rainwater had gathered in a shallow pool, Etienne stopped. They'll return, he said. They don't like doors that stay half open. They'll return if you let them, Maigret said. If you leave your chair warm, then what should I do? Leave Paris? Paris doesn't notice departures, Maigret replied. It remembers chairs more than faces. You go back to your work. You let your minutes be yours again. But you tell me the truth when you see more than numbers. They reached Rue Chapon, just as the concierge was sweeping the wet out of the lobby. She looked up, broom paused mid-air. Another telephone, she reported. This one softer. The man said only, "It will be finished soon," and then silence. I thought the line had drowned. Maigret glanced at Etienne, who had lowered his eyes to the tiles. You recognize the voice? It was him, Etienne whispered. But softer, yes. As if he were promising himself something, not me. The concierge tapped her broom against the floor, disapproving of men who used telephones instead of doors. Maigret went upstairs with Etienne. Room 9 smelled faintly of dust, of absence trying to justify itself. The hat still waited on the chair as though it were its own master. Do you want it? Maigret asked. I want it gone, Etienne said, almost fiercely. It isn't mine. It makes me inhabit a head that isn't mine. Maigret lifted it carefully, balanced it on his palm, then placed it inside the wardrobe on the top shelf where it could not stare. He shut the door gently, as if tucking a restless child. You'll stay here tonight, Maigret said. I'll have a man nearby. If the hat's owner comes to claim it, he'll meet someone else. He'll meet someone else. I won't sleep, Etienne muttered. Then listen, Maigret said. Rooms tell more in the dark. When Maigret returned to the quay, Lucas was waiting, sleeves rolled and eyes alert. We've a whisper, he said. Rivaux has been seen at a garage near Bastille. Not his business, but he uses it to store comings and goings. And there's a ledger missing from a firm on Rue Réaumur. Deliveries to places that no longer exist. Somebody wanted them to exist on paper, though. Numbers written for ghosts, Maigret said. That would be worth a small fortune to a man who knows which ghost to introduce. Lucas nodded. Shall we lift him? Not yet. If we pull too soon, he'll leave us with hats on chairs. I want the ledger, not his smile. He left instructions for Janvier to keep his shadow on Rivaux's path and for Lucas to ask at the garage, but not to enter. Sometimes doors spoke more closed than open. Then he walked home late, to where Madame Maigret had left soup covered and warm. You'll not finish tonight, she said as she ladled it. No, he agreed. They rarely do. But you'll know which shoes creak by the end. The night was quiet, but in room 9 the quiet had teeth. Etienne sat by the lamp, a book open but unread, every sound on the stair magnified. He thought of the hat in the wardrobe, and wondered if shutting a door silenced it or only taught it patience. When at last he leaned back, it was not sleep but a posture of surrender. In the early morning Maigret returned, the damp already rising from the cobbles. Etienne was awake, eyes lined. No one came, he said. But I dreamt the chair was still warm. They came elsewhere, Maigret answered. Rivaux was seen near Bastille again. He will return to you only when he is sure the ledger is safe. That is the hat he wishes to fit on your head. And if he fails, then he will try to make you fail instead, Maigret said. He struck a match, lit his pipe, and let the silence return to its rightful place in the room. But men who leave hats on chairs always forget one detail. Chairs remember the weight. Etienne looked at him as if uncertain whether the remark was comfort or warning. Perhaps it was both. By midday, Lucas reported that the garage had seen movement, a man arriving with a case, leaving lighter. Not Rivaux, but one of his silent companions. The case had been carried like paper, pretending to be stone. They're moving the ledger, Lucas said. Or preparing to burn it, Maigret replied. We'll have to let them think the fire is theirs. And then we'll see what Ash tells us. That evening, Maigret stood again in the Brasserie Dauphine, where the rain wrote long sentences on the quay. He placed his hat brim down, drank slowly, and listened. In the corner, the baker reclaimed his chair, his own hat back on its rightful hook. And Maigret thought of the other hat, silent in the wardrobe of room 9, waiting not for its head but for the truth that carried it. He sat a while longer in the brasserie, letting the room find its old temperature, then paid and walked back into the drizzle. The key gave off its smell of damp paper and stone. If he had gone home, he would have found the table laid, the knife wiped twice, and a question waiting without being asked. Instead, he turned toward Bastille by streets that did not require decisions. The garage Lucas had mentioned was a long rectangle of tin and patience pressed between two buildings that remembered horses. From the street, nothing, just a slit of light along a door and the steady cough of a small stove learning its work. He did not go in. He circled, counting windows, doors, the easy ways and the honest ones. A dark courtyard opened behind a fence. From it, a low passage led into the garage office. He stood there long enough for damp to climb into his cuffs, then moved on and came back as if he had forgotten a coin. At the corner, Janvier lifted his collar and the brim of his cap by the smallest degree. Across the way, a man left the garage with a case that tried to pretend it was heavier than it was. The man adjusted his grip, not because of weight, but because of eyes. He took the boulevard as men do when a timetable comforts them. The smell came after him, sweet tobacco, a kind of sugar in the smoke. Maigret watched the case and the shoulders and thought of the hat shut up in room 9's wardrobe, the scent it had carried from another head. The man, not Riveau, disappeared into the metro as if entering a drawer. When the grill clanged back, the street was itself again. He returned by way of Rue Chapon. The concierge had the radio on low, a voice describing weather as if it were a friend who sometimes failed to arrive. Colette was there, the parcel already handed over, the string folded into neat obedience on the desk. "He won't sleep," she said without preface. "He will sleep when he stops listening for footsteps," Maigret said. "Do you know smoke?" "I iron," she answered. "Everything passes under the nose. Sweet tobacco sticks to wool longer than to cotton. Ink burns with a blue edge if the paper is thick." He looked at her. "Who told you that?" "An old laundress," she said. "She taught me to save collars by knowing the edges." She studied his face a moment. "You'll be near a stove tonight." He almost smiled. "Perhaps." At the office, he sent Lucas home for an hour's dinner and kept Janvier where he was. The desk's lamp made a pool that might have been at the bottom of a well. He wrote a line and crossed it out. The second line looked like the first. At 10 he stood, as if the chair had told him it had done what it could. Bastille again. The city had turned down its gas. The same slit of light, the cough steadier now, a glow showing at the bottom of the office door the way rumour shows under conversation. He waited. A figure crossed the light once, twice, each time smoother. Then the door shut with the finality of hands that have done what they came to do. The street swallowed a car. The sound withdrew. He counted to 30 as men count, when they intend to be honest about their impatience, then tried the courtyard gate. It was closed with a chain that had learned resignation. He looked up. A rainpipe ran down beside a window with flaking paint, the kind of window that stays locked out of habit rather than plan. He tested the pipe. It held the weight of a man who had eaten properly his whole life. Inside, the office was warm with the satisfaction stoves take in having been useful. The iron mouth glowed and exhaled. On its top, a metal sheet warped slightly with heat. Under that, something smouldered in the manner of paper deciding to remember fire too late. He lifted the sheet with a rag and saw grey that had once been lines and numbers. He did not touch. He waited until a small draught made itself and curbed it with his hat in his hand like a bellows held backward. The fire reduced itself to sulking. He took the poker and lifted the top layer as one lifts a blanket from a sleeping child, slowly, to see whether the breathing is even. Colette was right. Along some edges a faint blue lived, the ghost a line leaves when ink tries to be smoke. Beneath, heat had glued 2 pages together by accident. He lifted them with a palette knife found among the garage's honest tools and laid them flat on a cleared desk. The top page had become lace. The bottom had kept its sentences where the other's holes had not found them. He bent close. The numbers were timid but legible where they had been protected. He read a column of dates, the kind offices keep when they believe dates are character. Opposite destinations. Some existed on maps. 2 did not. The same 2 returned like a cough, a warehouse at a number that belonged to a bakery demolished last year, a firm whose letterbox still took advertisements, but nothing else. And there twice a name written with care, Vasseur Blanchisserie Rue du Verbois. Not Colette's, another an older laundry that had employed girls to carry bundles in weather that did not forgive them. He let the paper breathe under his hand and looked for names behind the names. A stamped oval mark had survived better than ink, GM du Nord, one of the old department stores whose label had lived in the hat band in room 9. The mark had impressed itself deeply, as if someone had leaned heavily when stamping. Deliveries to the store, then away again to nowhere. Paper moving where carts had not. Men paid to draw arrows on ledgers until money followed them. He turned the page. Half a clump of characters fell away and lay like black snow. At the bottom, a signature had burned into its own ashes. He knew the shape of the R. He pressed the 2 sheets together where they had been married by heat, hoping they would share what each lacked. He made a small folder of them and slid it into the inside pocket where breath would not make them fugitive. He did not extinguish the stove. He closed its mouth and turned the air down the way a nurse covers a patient. In the courtyard, the fence chain knocked once against its loop, as if surprised no one had claimed to own the sound. Back in the street, he walked without haste, and at the first kiosk with a telephone he called Lucas. Fetch the night magistrate if he can be asked without noise, and a warrant for the garage in the morning. We have ash that writes better than ink. Rivo? Lucas asked. Close enough to smell the smoke, Maigret said. He slept a few hours and woke to the argument pigeons make with gutters. At 8 he was at Rue du Verbois. The laundry had a frontage of old tiles and a bell that did not announce itself so much as explain that it had done its duty for years. A woman with a shawl and a face like a well-kept ledger looked at him over spectacles. We are closed, she began, and then saw that he belonged to the kind of hour that ignored signs. Unless it is for sheets, police, he said gently. An old account interests me. Old account interests me. Everything here is old, she replied. Except the girls. They go and are replaced. She said it without cruelty. We once took for the grand magasins, yes. Not anymore. They went to men who put numbers in typewriters and forgot to send the carts, who arranged the forgetting. A man who ate a roll standing up, she said promptly. He wore a black hat he didn't love. His name changed according to who wanted him. Rivo once, Nivo once. He had a swallow before every lie. He told us we would be paid for handling bundles that never arrived if we signed the receipt. It was an improvement, he said. Fewer stains. You signed. We signed for 2 months, she said, pulling the shawl closer as if paper had a chill. Then we stopped. We prefer soap to paper. He tried the other laundries. Some liked paper. It keeps the hands white. Did a girl named Vasseur work here? He asked. Half the girls are Vasseur, she said. The rest are Martin. But you mean the one with the careful mouth. She left 3 years ago. She ironed where she no longer works. She looked at him with the private satisfaction of having told a truth that did not betray anyone. She is decent. She would not sign a receipt for something she could not put her hand on. He thanked her and returned to Rue Chapon. Colette was on the landing with a damp sheet folded over her arm, hair pinned as if by a promise. She looked at his hands, not his face. You smelled of stove already, she said. I brought ash that writes, he answered. The old store's stamp appears in it. Your name appears too, but not yours. She neither startled nor acted. The laundry where I began, she said. They took signatures for deliveries they did not receive. It meant the girls had less to carry. It also meant someone carried money in their place. Rivo, he asked. He was called Rivo that season, she said. He watched the staircase and learned our times. He said it was modernity. And the hat in room 9? A promise, she repeated softly. Not from him. From a man who follows instructions. The one with the case. He smokes sweet tobacco. That would be the mechanic's brother, she said, surprising him with the ease of it. He collects things that do not belong to him by being asked to. Men like him need to be asked. Otherwise they do not happen, he nodded. The day had arranged its chairs. Tell Etienne to keep his hours, he said. Tonight he will be asked to be someone's idea again. He will decline. And then the man with the case will need a new chair. She tightened the sheet under her arm. What will you do? Watch a stove give up the rest of its secrets, he said. And invite a man to try on the hat he thought he could leave behind. At the quay, Lucas had the warrant. signed with reluctance and a good pen. The magistrate would trail behind at a dignified distance. Janvier reported that Rivaux had taken no trains, eaten no lunch one could point to, and never walked faster than a man who respects his breath. The garage door was open at 9. 2 cars coughed honesty. The office smelled of yesterday's decision. They entered without drama. The owner produced keys, eyebrows climbing and falling. "Paper, monsieur," Maigret said. "Preferably the kind men do not show to customers." They found a drawer with a false back that was tired of lying. Behind it, a packet of receipts stamped with ovals and the names of places that had stopped receiving years earlier. In the stove's ashpan, finer grey. The last third of a ledger leaf that had tried to be air and failed, carrying at its charred bottom 3 letters of a signature in a careful schoolboy's hand. Riv. The owner looked at the ash as if at a story he had not finished reading. He swallowed before he spoke. Somewhere in the street, a hat passed on a head that had no idea how many chairs it had left behind. They brought the owner to the quay and left him in a chair that made its own judgments. He said he rented space. He minded his stoves. He knew nothing of paper that pretended to be smoke. The magistrate blinked at the ash, at the oval stamps, at the careful beginnings of a name that would not quite burn. It was enough to tug a thread. Janvier went to fetch the man with the case, the mechanic's brother who smelled faintly of sugar and who, when told to come, came as men come, who have little experience of refusing doors with brass plates. Etienne waited in room 9, his chair turned a degree away from the table, as if it needed to look elsewhere. Colette came with a parcel and left with the empty string in her pocket, comforted by its obedience. The hat in the wardrobe discovered that darkness did not make it forget itself. At midday, the concierge sent up a bowl of soup, because soup persuades the unwilling to remain human. Etienne ate, glancing between spoonfuls at the closed door as if it might learn to speak. In the afternoon, the mechanic's brother sat opposite Maigret and stared at his hands, which were honest hands used for dishonest things. He did not try to protect himself with language. When Lucas set a glass of water in front of him, he looked grateful and more tired. He admitted to carrying cases that felt heavier when empty than when full. He admitted to taking receipts to be stamped by people who preferred stamps to carts. He said Rivaux had told him it was insurance against theft, a way of making the world agree in advance that goods had arrived even when they had not yet. It sounded clever while being cheap. "Where does he live?" Maigret asked. "He lives where people owe him attentions," the man said helplessly. "He has a key for a room near the Place des Vosges. He never sleeps there. He prefers to arrive, make the room realize it could be seen, and leave. Tonight," Maigret said, "he will arrive somewhere else." He sent Janvier to the square with instructions to watch nothing, then everything, then to watch again. He walked without hurrying to the Brasserie Dauphine, where the baker held his rightful chair, and the waiter nodded with the relief of a ritual not disturbed. He did not sit. He asked to borrow the telephone and called room 9. "Put the hat back on the chair," he told Etienne. "And go out for a walk. Count to 5 at corners. Come back at 7. Do nothing important in between." He telephoned Colette next and asked for a favor she would understand without allowing herself the vanity of understanding it. "At 7, he said, "come and sit with the concierge. If a man asks for pomade, ask him if he would like a glass of water. And if he swallows before he answers," she said, "I will pour 2. At 6, the sky pressed down in a pale lid. Between the house fronts and the street lamps, there was a sheet of light that did not quite belong to either. He walked up Rue Chapon as a man walks, who has visited a place too often to be expected. The concierge had polished her bell. Colette sat near the desk with a mending basket, in which the only thing being mended was waiting. He went up and put himself in the corner of the corridor, where the wallpaper remembered having once been green. The door of room 9 stood as it always did, holding back a room that wished to pass for irrelevant. He could hear the steady, small noises cities make when they are not speaking directly. Water in a pipe. The faint scuff of a shoe below. The turn of a page in a magazine that did not deserve the concentration brought to it. The stair creaked the way old wood creaks when it discovers it still prefers certain footsteps. At 10 minutes past 7, a man climbed without being seen to climb. He paused on the 3rd stair, on the 6th, on the 9th, as if numbers steadied him. He wore a hat he did not love. He knocked gently on the concierge's desk with a knuckle that made arrangements, and asked if Monsieur Pomard would be in to see reason. The concierge said Monsieur had gone for a walk, that he would return at any minute, and asked if the gentleman would like water. He said yes, then no, then yes again, because decisions needed to be paid for. He drank, and somewhere between mouth and throat, his swallow fought with his habit. He climbed. At the bend he saw Maigret, who did not move. Two men looking at each other in a hall make the hall consider itself. Rivaux took off his hat as if to prove it could be done, not because he wanted the air. He smiled carefully. "I come to settle a debt," he said. "We are even, I think." "We will see," Maigret answered. "A chair has been waiting for you." In the room the hat sat on the chair, recovered from its exile, perfectly mild. The lamp was lit, the note still pinned to its shade. Etienne's things were as quiet as they could be when watched. Rivaux looked around with the approval a man gives a place that has agreed not to embarrass him. He stood by the chair but did not sit. "It took courage to leave it," Maigret said. "Objects learn our weight. When we put them down on the wrong wood, they protest." "I left proof of my presence," Rivaux said. "Presence is currency." "You left a smell and a stamp," Maigret returned. "They drifted and impressed better than you meant. You left a ledger that thought it could be ash. It recited names between breaths. One of them was your own, in a hand that has practiced lying to itself." Rivaux's face altered not in expression, but in its decision to maintain one. He kept his hands empty and lifted his chin half a finger. "You have paper?" "I have absence where paper tried to be," Maigret said. "It will be enough. But I prefer to understand first. Understanding weighs less than proof and lasts longer. Rivaux looked at the chair, then at the wardrobe door as if something behind it wished to attend. "I was dismissed," he said suddenly. The words pulled from a pocket he had not intended to turn out. "From the store. I made a list wrong." Carts went wrong places. A man was humiliated publicly to make an example, and because his tie offended someone with a desk. He bought a hat that day to make his head new and found it was the same head under it. "You decided paper could be made to travel without carts," Maigret said. "I decided to do what they did. But for me," he said soberly, "they live on signatures. I would live on signatures. They never touch the goods. Why should I? I told myself I was efficient. I told myself I was educating the century and the hat." He looked at it as at an old friend who had never become an ally. "It started as a joke," he admitted. "Men look to their hats to know who they are. I left one to make him wonder which man he had been hired to be. It worked too well." He left his room. "He made me visible to myself. I saw that I had become a person who visits rooms to be seen." He swallowed, and the swallow had lost its practice. In the hall the concierge coughed because someone had to. "You used laundries," Maigret went on softly. "You made girls sign for what they did not carry, because paper asked them to. You told them it kept their hands white." He closed his eyes briefly. "I told them what I had been told when I was useful. That signatures are clean work. That touch is for fools. I told myself it was a mercy to ask nothing but ink." "You burned a ledger," Maigret said. "I tried," he said. "It is hard to burn what you are." For a time they were quiet, with the lamp making a little island around an ordinary chair. Etienne's breathing could be heard now, even though he was not in the room. He had come back and was at the end of the corridor, not stepping because stepping would decide things. Colette sat with the concierge, mending a cloth that did not require it. "You will come with us," Maigret said at last, and there was no drama in it. "You will bring your hat. They will ask you questions in rooms where the chairs are all the right chairs. You will answer. You will find that answers weigh less than hiding." Rivaux looked at the chair and then he sat in it, because some scenes cannot end until a detail returns to its place. He set the hat on his knees and looked down at it, as if it had written him a letter. When he stood he seemed smaller, but perhaps he was only nearer his right size. In the lobby he paused to drink the last of the water Colette had poured. He drank without swallowing first. The concierge put her broom away. It had done its service. Son rue Chapon. The mist had risen to exactly the height of a man's shoulders. Janvier, outside, stepped from a doorway that could be anybody's and did not need to be explained. At the quay, in a clean room with a table that did not pretend to be anything else, Rivaux spoke. He did not confess so much as read algebra aloud. Money had travelled by signature. Names had been made to go where carts did not. A garage stove had been asked to learn literature, and had tried. He accepted each word he used as if it had been chosen for him by a careful clerk. When asked why, He said the century owed him courtesy and had not paid. He said he had wanted to be the man who returned property in rooms where people feared to see him. He said leaving a hat is a way of announcing that the person exists who can pick it up. When it was done, it was done. They put him in a cell that smelled of stone and fatigue. He sat on a bench and placed the hat beside him with a tenderness that had finally found the right object. Maigret walked home in a rain that no longer insisted. In the brasserie, the baker had his chair. The hat was where it belonged on the back. The waiter brought beer without asking, and mentioned, as if about the weather, that Madame had telephoned to say the stew would forgive lateness. He drank a small mouthful and left most of it. At home, the table waited, knife wiped twice. Madame listened while folding a towel and said only, "It is a pity that men who want courtesy cannot recognize it without a mirror." He nodded, took off his hat and set it brim down in its usual place. In the morning he would send someone to fetch Etienne's minutes and give him back his room. The hat from the wardrobe would be tagged and put in a cupboard among umbrellas, gloves and other objects that had tried to be messages. He would write a line that said little and could not be argued with. And then he would walk to the window and look out at a city that kept order by knowing how much disarray to allow. The rain would be there or not. Chairs would remember who had sat in them. He would stand a moment, not thinking very much, and then pick up his coat and go. The case ended not with a bang, but with a quiet settling of weight, like a chair reclaiming the form of a man who has left it. At the quay, the magistrate signed the papers that would keep Rivaux, where walls, not habits, defined his movements. The receipts and half-burned ledger told their story without raising their voices, and the hat, tagged and catalogued, was placed in a cupboard among umbrellas and gloves. In reports it became an object of evidence. In truth, it was a fragment of a man's vanity, as ordinary as it was damning. Etienne Bréard returned to his desk on the third floor that trembled when the trams passed. His colleagues welcomed him without ceremony, as if absence had been another form of punctuality. He resumed his minutes, 5 to the door, 3 to the mirror, 7 to the beer not drunk. When he passed shop windows now, he still looked, but with less fear of what might be reflected back. He remained small by choice, but he no longer mistook smallness for invisibility. Colette went on carrying parcels on Tuesdays and Fridays. She ironed shirts into submission and listened to the starch tell her which men were lonely, which still fought to be admired, which no longer cared if they were seen. Sometimes when she paused on the landing, she thought of the hat in the wardrobe and of the men who had tried to use it as a message. She would smooth the fold of paper around a collar and remind herself that silence often spoke more cleanly than ink. The concierge kept her broom by the desk and told the story of the telephone calls to anyone patient enough to listen. She exaggerated nothing. She said only, "The voice asked if the hat was still on the chair, and I told him we were not a cloakroom." She would smile, proud of her answer, and shake her head at the foolishness of men who thought hats could do their talking for them. Maigret wrote his report with the calm strokes of a man who had nothing to prove. He described how signatures had replaced carts, how receipts had stood in for sweat, how Rivaux had convinced himself that courtesy was a debt to be collected rather than given. He left out the hat's smell of sweet tobacco, the sound of the swallow before a lie, the way Etienne's shoulders had sagged with relief when nothing was asked of him. Those details remained in his memory, not on paper where they belonged. When it was finished, he walked home slowly through streets rinsed by a light rain. The baker had reclaimed his corner table, the waiter had his apron straight, and Madame Maigret had kept the stew warm. She did not ask for details. She poured his wine, set the bread, and said only, "You look tired, but less than yesterday." He nodded. He sat with her in silence, listening to the rain on the windows. Somewhere in a cupboard, a hat waited without a head, stripped of its importance, as ordinary as any other piece of cloth and felt. Somewhere else, in a cell with stone walls, a man sat on a bench and thought of reasons, of chairs, of rooms where he had been seen. And in Paris, life continued its small, complicated rhythms. Steps counted on pavements, shirts ironed smooth, soup ladled into bowls, ordinary details that, in the end, explained everything. Maigret lit his pipe, let it go out, and sat back. He had not defeated a villain, only untangled a man from the lies he told himself. It was enough. Cases rarely ended with triumph. They ended with the return of balance, fragile but serviceable, like a chair standing quietly in its proper place.